Hi and welcome. Today I'm going to do something that I've never done before on this channel. I'm going to analyze the natal chart of a famous person who I find interesting, and I see how her natal chart really kind of matches up with the kind of person that she is, and I'd like to talk about a few elements of her natal chart. So I'm going to talk about Alanis Morissette's natal chart. Alanis Morissette is a very famous singer-songwriter, musician. She was born on the 1st of June 1974 in Ottawa, Canada, presumably at 9:51 a.m. And so I'm going to take some elements of her chart sort of apart and talk about how they connect with who she is. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is, you can see from her date of birth that she has Sun in Gemini. Now, I think this is significant with her because Alanis Morissette is very intellectual and she's quite wordy. She likes using words in her work. She's very lyrical, but she uses a lot of different words in her music, and she really wants to communicate and bring some kind of information through to the listener. And I think she's quite versatile in that she seems to have kind of different sides that are very prominent, and she uses this in her work. So I think Alanis Morissette is kind of a true Gemini in that sense. Her lyrical content is often focused on having a message of a universal emotional message that she's bringing across through what she expresses, and she uses a lot of complicated language at times, a lot of words to get this across, which is very Gemini. Alanis also has a podcast, and she writes, and she has done a lot of things. She's acted. She's very versatile, and I think especially with the podcast, it kind of shows her Gemini side in the sense that she likes to really express herself in words and kind of communicate information. She wants to communicate, and she wants to bring across information, and she's very heady. She's very emotional, but she's also very heady. So I think these are characteristics that kind of fit with her Gemini sun. Now, I also find it interesting that Alanis' sun falls into the 11th house in her natal chart, which shows that she's kind of a worldly person. She is interested in the collective consciousness. She talks about collective consciousness in her work, in her interviews. She's kind of aware socially, and she likes talking about her friends, her social life. She seems quite socially active. She identifies as an introvert who has a very extroverted lifestyle, if that makes sense. It's kind of her own words. Now, her sun, interestingly, is opposite Neptune, which is probably one of the more sensitive aspects. The person can be quite easily hurt, very easily, can get emotional, can have certain emotional issues that have to do with just how sensitive you are and how you pick up information from the environment, and it can be positive and it can be negative. Now, Alanis actually identifies as a highly sensitive person, which is now recognized as an actual thing. So, as a highly sensitive person, you're sensitive to the environment in a way that is really affecting how you feel inside. So you may be very sensitive to sensory inputs, and kind of just you can be easily hurt, and this comes across in her music and in her work. So you can see that this person really wants to use her sensitivity in a way that actually is beneficial. So she puts that sensitivity that she has into her work, into her music, into her lyrics. So I find that an interesting aspect. Now she also has her son. I'm not going to go through all the aspects, but just the ones that I picked out that I feel are most relevant or most interesting for this discussion. And also, I found that she has Sun trine Pluto, which is gives her that kind of slightly powerful air, like she's a powerful person without necessarily meaning to be, but it's how she kind of maybe carries herself. It's the trines are very flowing energies, so it's like she doesn't have to do anything, and she just comes across as this kind of powerful individual in some sense, without she didn't mean to be necessarily, but it just kind of happened for her because of this trine. And also it gives her a lot of tremendous amount of insight into the human condition, and she's not afraid to talk about the human condition in ways that are maybe shocking. Pluto can be quite shocking, or in ways that are whatever way she does it, it kind of opens people's eyes into kind of the human condition, and she's very in tune psychologically with the human condition and with the different aspects of emotion and life that are inside us all, that we go through. And I find this Sun trine Pluto very interesting in that sense, that she kind of harnesses and commands. She has this like powerful energy, which is really as a result maybe of her being so in touch with kind of the darker psychology of life in a positive way, because trines are quite positive. So she has tremendous insight psychologically into the human condition. Now, another interesting aspect of Alanis's chart is that she has a Scorpio moon conjunct Uranus. Um, it's an out of sign conjunction, but I would consider it a conjunction nonetheless. So, I mean, her Scorpio moon is quite obvious in the sense that she is someone who goes through a lot of emotional heaviness and a lot of emotional darkness, a lot of emotional ups and downs, and she kind of comes out the other end of it with more insight and a stronger, emotionally stronger person. So she has gone through some very cathartic experiences that have come out in her music, in her lyrics, and in her career path. And so she expresses that kind of in a way that, well, she has created and she has allowed herself to thrive in a creative environment that allows her to really express her deepest and darkest emotions, and often very erratic emotions, because the moon is conjunct Uranus, and moon in Scorpio can be quite erratic as well. Now, this moon conjunction with Uranus is giving a Uranian flavor to this Scorpio moon, which is already very intense and a lot of emotion. It deals with a lot of emotional ups and downs. So there's a lot of erratic emotional impulses here. There's a lot of emotional ups and downs. There's a lot of unexpectedness and a lot of just wild rides when it comes to emotions. A lot of roller coasters when it comes to emotions. But moon in Scorpio is not just like a terrible position to have or anything like that, because yes, it can be difficult, but Alanis is an example of someone who has really used that in her creative work, and she has kind of risen above certain challenges emotionally, and she has come out very she has come out of situations more emotionally intense, more emotionally insightful, because of these experiences that she's had. And Moon in Scorpio is kind of a natural emotional psychologist, if that makes sense. So they have an emotional understanding of humans and how to deal with certain situations, because they've been through so much on an internal, complex, emotional level. And this comes out in her Alanis's lyrics very much, in terms of how she's not afraid. She might be afraid. She's actually talked about how she kind of goes to work even though she actually does feel afraid at times and embarrassed and all these emotions, but she still does it. And so she allows herself the freedom to express herself and express her emotions in a way that is cathartic for her, in a way that allows her to fly above it and get out of situations in a way that is necessary in order for her to grow. And so she's gone through a lot of emotional ups and downs, which is evident in her lyrics, in her songs, but she kind of grows with that. She evolves with that. I've seen a lot of evolving in Alanis. You know, if you look at the Jagged Little Pill days, if you look at her now, you can see that this is a woman that has really grown on an emotional level, and she's still on a journey. But yeah, this having this moon in Scorpio is very emotionally intense, and especially having it conjunct Uranus makes it especially erratic. But also, moon conjunct Uranus is very emotionally insightful, because Uranus is the intuitive, the higher intuitive planet. So you can have sudden insights and intuitions about whatever issue is present. So if moon is the emotions and Uranus is intuitive insights, and you combine them, well, you get someone who has a lot of emotional intuitive insights, or intuitive insights about emotional situations. But with that comes the kind of Uranian erratic nature as well. So she's very emotionally insightful, but she's also emotionally erratic. Now, I also find interesting that Alanis has three planets in Cancer. Those are Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. And Mercury and Saturn are in a very tight conjunction in Cancer in the 11th house. And I'm using the equal house system here because that is the house system that I generally tend to use. And I think her house placements work pretty well with this chart. So having Mercury and Saturn in a conjunction can be quite heavy in terms of your thinking. So the Saturn can bring a certain amount of heaviness, and so this sometimes comes across in her lyrics. And but because her Mercury is in the 11th house, again, that is kind of fueling that Sun in the 11th house thing that she has, that she's very conscious, and she's aware of the collective consciousness and the collective energies, and she's kind of a higher thinker. And I think her 11th house planets kind of show this. She has Sun, Mercury, and Saturn in the 11th house. And the fact that she has these Cancer placements, especially I'd like to talk about Mercury in Cancer. So Mercury in Cancer is tends to think in a way that is influenced by their emotions, and it's kind of like an emotional memory that is being heightened. So if you think about Alanis's lyrics, if you're aware of her lyrics, she can often talk about things of the past, and she's quite emotionally aware about things of the past and that she has gone through, and she puts like an emotional flavor, which is Cancer, to the way that she's thinking about the past, which is Mercury governs how we think. And so she's definitely aware of her emotional memory and how certain things have affected her from the past, and she brings this out in the way that she communicates, which is Mercury. So like I said, I'm not going to go through every single element of her chart because there's so many elements. She has a lot of aspects. But another element that I'd like to talk about is Jupiter being in Pisces in the 8th house. I find this significant because Alanis clearly has gone through a lot of growth and kind of spiritual evolution, spiritual growth. Jupiter in Pisces is a spiritual grower, and having it in the 8th house is the house of transformation, and Jupiter is the house of expansion, and Pisces is the most spiritual sign. So I think this really adds up that she has Jupiter in Pisces in the 8th house. So this points to her spiritual evolution that she has spoken about very openly, and that you can observe in her through the way that she talks and through the way that she expresses herself in her music and in her interviews. So I think this is a significant position in Alanis's chart. And arguably the most interesting aspect of her chart that I find, fascinating and very true in her case, is that Alanis Morissette has Chiron conjunct the MC, and those are both in Aries. And what that basically is showing, that the MC is how the public sees you, and it's to do with your work, your career, your public image basically. And Aries is the sign that is kind of the most self involved or the most self focused. And Alanis's lyrics often have to do with her own inner emotional issues, which kind of again is a nod to her moon in Scorpio. And she's communicating that Sun in Gemini in a way that is very she connects with the public in that way. So if she had Aries rising, which she has Leo rising, but if she had Aries rising, then she would kind of be self-focused, because that's just how she is, like, as a person. But because she has an Aries MC, this shows that her Aries nature, this kind of self-focused, can be self-involved sort of person, is kind of in the public, is the public image version of her. So she may not actually be very self-focused inside, but because she has this Aries MC, that's how she connects with the public. So her lyrics are very personal. She talks about her own experiences a lot, and that's what connected her with her audience back in the Jagged Little Pill days, and it's still ongoing today. Those who are still following her, they may still be able to connect with her through her lyrics, because she's talking about her own experiences and her own emotions largely, and her own feelings and her own thoughts largely. And this has led to her being very aware herself that that's how she kind of connects with the public, is her openness and her bravery and her courage, which is the Aries, in the public eye, to be able to just talk about her own feelings and her own experiences so openly in her work, in her public eye, in her public image side of things. So I hope that I explained that adequately, because I do find that extremely interesting that she has this position, because also Chiron is in Aries, and Chiron is all about our wounds, and it's the wounded healer. So it's a wound that you have that you can use to help other people who have similar wounds. And because this is an Aries, it means that she helps people. She has helped people come to terms with their own inner issues, very personal self issues, which is Aries, through talking about her own wounds, her own personal inner issues, which is Aries. So I hope that made sense, because I find that so important to stress, that it's so interesting that she has this Aries MC and this Aries Chiron, and her Chiron is on the is conjunct the MC. So really, her public image, the way that people kind of generally perceive her in the public eye, is very much to do with her Chironic nature. So her wounds, her wounded healer-ness, is what people in the public eye see in her, and it allows Alanis to heal others through just expressing this inner fire and this inner pain and this bravery and all this everything Aries. So people just see that Chironic nature in her in the public eye way, because Chiron is conjunct the MC, and because all of those are in Aries. She has really pioneered. Aries is the pioneer. She has really pioneered kind of her way. She has kind of made her way through talking about her own experiences in a creative way. She's not just rambling on about her experiences. She's doing it in a creative way, because her Venus is actually also conjunct the MC and Chiron. And Venus is the planet that often governs music and art and creative expression. So having this Venus conjunct with those 2, and it's Venus in Taurus actually as well, and Venus in Taurus is very artistic as well. So having Venus, Chiron, and the MC in a conjunction together like that, it shows that her public eye image has very much to do with how she openly expresses her wounds and her pain and her emotions and even her anger, because Chiron in Aries especially can have a wound that's related to some kind of inner anger, some kind of identity issues, or some kind of anger issues, or some kind of anger it's something to do with anger. It doesn't mean that she's an angry person, but just her public image often has to do with how she has written some angry songs. She has other types of songs, obviously. She brings in a lot of information into her songs, a lot of emotion into her songs, but she does have that angry public image at times, or just some of her songs are dealing with emotions that are painful and angry, and this is part of her public image. It's kind of how people recognize her. You know, she's a woman who sings openly about her anger and about other emotions, and people see that in her, which is the MC. So those are some of the main elements that I find very interesting about Alanis's chart. I'm sure I could have talked about a lot of other things, because she has a lot of aspects, and her chart is very interesting, and it really seems to match up with who Alanis Morissette is, and who she seems to be as well, because we don't always see people in the public eye as how they really are, but it's kind of a combination of a lot of different things, and we just see some parts of her, but her chart just seems to kind of match up with a lot of things about her. So I just wanted to pick out some elements that I find the most striking, and it's my first time making something like this, so I hope it made sense and I hope it was interesting, and thank you very much for listening.